Etar upadrato nityam jivaloka svabhavajai nakaroti haryanunam kathamritam nidoratim. Because the conditioned soul is always disturbed by the bodily necessities, such as hunger and thirst, he has very little time to cultivate attachment to hearing the nectarine words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhakti Swami Prabhupada. Unless one is associated with devotees, he cannot cultivate Krishna consciousness. Nirjana bhajana, cultivating Krishna consciousness in a solitary place, is not possible for the neophyte, for he will be disturbed by the bodily necessities, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Being so disturbed, one cannot cultivate Krishna consciousness. We therefore see that devotees known as sahajya, who make everything very easy, do not associate with advanced devotees. Such persons, in the name of devotional activities, are addicted to all kinds of sinful acts, illicit sex, intoxication, gambling, and meat eating. There are many so-called devotees passing themselves off as devotees while engaging in these sinful activities. In other words, one who is influenced by sinful activity cannot be accepted as a person in Krishna consciousness. A person addicted to sinful life cannot develop Krishna consciousness as indicated in this verse. Because the conditioned soul is always disturbed by bodily necessities such as hunger and thirst, he has very little time to cultivate attachment to hearing the nectarine words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Who selected this verse? Would you like to explain why you selected this verse? His intelligence is being controlled by his finger. Or perhaps you're just totally surrendering to the Lord. May your fingers stop on top of my head and bless me. It's a human baby crying. I will speak briefly so that we have much time for questions, answers, and discussions like that. But how to speak briefly on this verse? It is a crucial section of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Narada Muni is speaking to King Prachini Barishat. The king was a very religious man who was simply caught up with mundane responsibilities and the ritualistic aspects of religion. And unfortunately, although he considered himself religious because he was performing yagyas, he was following certain principles, even his so-called religion was distracting himself away from the very purpose of the religion. What to speak of his ordinary dealings. Because as a grihasta, or let us say in this case, a householder, so many pressures, taking care of a family, whoever you are, whether you're a king or a businessman or a farmer, it's not very likely that your children are going to behave the way you want them to behave. It's not very likely that your husband or wife, their egos are going to always harmonize with yours. And in terms of business or profession, there's always challenges. Srila Prabhupada gives example that in the forest, all the bamboo trees are actually brothers and sisters. They're of the same caste, same nationality. They basically have the same color. They all have the same educational qualifications. And essentially, they're all related. They're all coming, one generation, 2 generations from seeds from the same trees. Usually there's one bamboo tree, and then, if some seeds drop, and then more and more and more. So they're, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So they're all related. They're in the same family, same gotra. But still, the wind blows and it causes the bamboo trees to rub against each other. They don't have intention. It's not like one bamboo tree says, I'm going to rub against you. No, it just happens by the power of the wind. And that rubbing causes friction, and the friction creates fire, and it burns the forest. So whose fault is it? You can't blame the bamboo trees ultimately, and you can't even blame the wind. It's just destiny. And you can't blame destiny either, because ultimately destiny is controlled by the Supreme Controller. And you can't blame the Supreme Controller because he gives every living being free will to respond to destiny according to their own choice. So who's responsible for the forest fire? But it happens. And Srila Prabhupada explains, in the same way, in human relationships, there's always going to be challenges, problems, crisis, difficulties, sickness, death, adhyatmaka, adidaivaka, adibhotika. They are inevitable. And trying to deal with these challenges can be a massive distraction from our spiritual life. So our spiritual life has to be something very real, something very deep, in order to actually help us remain focused through all the distractions of this world. But in the case of Maharaj Prachini Barhishat, even his religion was a distraction, because he was attached to the external ritualistic form without really understanding its purpose. The very thing that's meant to focus us becomes a distraction itself. Unfortunately, this is the predominant syndrome of religion in Kali Yuga, where the various social expectations, the egos, trying to prove yourself, can be great distractions. Even the right philosophy could be a distraction if we're not trying to pursue the purpose of the philosophy. If we become attached to putting all our time to memorize it, to be a scholar, and to be known as a scholar, then even though the philosophy is telling us to surrender to Krishna, we never surrender to Krishna. We ultimately surrender to we use the philosophy of the Siddhanta to feed our own ego. It is very important, sadagrahi, that we associate with advanced devotees because they help us to actually focus on the essence, on the purpose, on the goal. Jnana vijnana triptatma, Krishna tells. Real happiness comes when Gyan transforms into Vigyan. Vigyan means realization. Knowledge that we actually deeply understand, not just intellectually, but practically as well. We see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There were people who had tremendous knowledge. Ramdas Vishwas. He was a scholar of Ramayana. He was 24 hours a day chanting the glories of Ram. And even such an exalted Vaishnava as Radhanath-Swami was so much attracted to hearing him speak. And he also wanted to serve. He wanted to serve Raghunath Bhatta. But his motivation was ultimately to become God, not to serve God. Even though his name was Ramdas Vishwas. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Samasiddhir Haditoshanam, all our spiritual advancement is simply based on how we please the Lord. And the Lord in the heart actually understands our motives. Because he was in the Lord's Leela, and he did associate with Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, eventually I'm sure he became a great Mahatma. But at least initially, Lord Chaitanya ignored him completely because he didn't have the proper purpose. Prabhupada said Krishna doesn't see what we know or what we do. He sees the purpose in which we learn it and the purpose in which we do it. That pleases Krishna. Bhakti mam abhijanati. Krishna can only be approached through devotion. Sometimes people in the world, they have this misconception that bhakti is for real simple people. It's a very easy thing. It's not very high. It's not very deep. It's for the general masses. For people who are actually really serious and staunch. They do different forms of yoga, gyan, where they discriminate and they mentally disassemble everything in material creation to seek Brahman. Or they perform severe tapasya and severe meditations. And bhakti's for, that's what Prakashananda Saraswati said about Lord Chaitanya and all his devotees. He said he's just a mundane sentimentalist. Here in Varanasi, where we are actually deeply engaged in tapasya, where we are deeply scrutinizing the Vedas according to the commentaries of the saints, where we not only performed Tapasya, but we know the science of very, very profound, long meditation. Nobody here will take him serious, except these sentimental, mundane people. That's actually the common understanding of bhakti. People don't understand Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Rupan Sanatan, and Raghunath Das Goswami. No one was more austere or learned. So there's so much misconception about what bhakti actually is. Bhakti is the deepest thing. And all these schools have their commentaries of Bhagavad Gita, but they overlook Bhaktya Mam Abhijanati, Bhaktya Tvananya Shakya, Sarva Dharman Purityajya, Manmana Bhavamad Bhakto. Throughout the Gita, bhakti is the way to know the Lord. So distraction. Prakashananda Saraswati was a very powerful ascetic and scholar. In Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, Lord Chaitanya referred to him to Murari Gupta, that he thinks he knows everything, and he thinks he's a great realized person, but he simply attacks the limbs of the Lord. He wants to break the body of the Lord through his so-called philosophy. He doesn't know it, but I've already put leprosy in his body. Yayatamam prapadyante, the Lord reciprocates according to how we approach him. If our philosophy is trying to nullify the Lord's body, the Lord reciprocates by putting leprosy in his body. He said he doesn't know it, but he will find out. But by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, before the leprosy actually emerged, he got Prakashananda to surrender. And now he's a liberated soul. So this is very high level of distraction. I think most of us are more like King Prachini Barhi here. Just absorbed in mundane things, and then when it comes to focusing, we focus on the ritualistic, socialistic, egoistic conceptions of our spirituality. But how did Prachini Barhishat actually raise to a higher platform? He couldn't do it himself because he was trapped. And his ego was justifying everything he was doing. He was thinking he was really great. But by the association of Narada Muni actually brought him to that higher platform. Because the conditioned soul is always disturbed by the bodily necessities such as hunger and thirst, he has very little time to cultivate attachment to hearing the nectarine words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is what Srila Prabhupada emphasized so much on behalf of the Acharyas. Shrama eva hi kevalam. Whatever success, whatever apparent victories we may have in this world, if it does not help to increase our taste to hear about Krishna, the Bhagavatam tells it's a waste of time. Srinvatam Sukata Krishna Punjasravana Kirtana. When we develop that taste for hearing about Krishna, we attract Krishna's mercy. And Krishna within the heart, he removes the anarthas. that are literally impossible for a conditioned soul to remove. Pushti Marg means by the path of grace. Bhakti is the path of grace. By pleasing Krishna, by his grace, he could remove the anarthas. And the anarthas can be gross or can be so subtle to distract us. Shushusho Shadadanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahatsevaya Vipra Punya Tirthana Sevana. And how do we get that taste for hearing about Krishna? It doesn't come alone just by hearing. That is necessary. But in order for our hearing to actually have the attitude by which Krishna will reciprocate, we must serve. We must render service to great souls. And that's ultimately how Lord Chaitanya began the process of transformation of Prakashananda Saraswati. Prakashananda was blaspheming Lord Chaitanya miserably. His words are immortally within the Chaitanya Charitamrita. We quoted some of them. He was just calling him a mundane sentimentalist, bogus sannyasi. What's he doing associating with all these people? He should be with us. He was indicating the reason he's not with us is because he's so inferior. He's afraid to even come near us. Therefore, he goes with all these mundane people because then, because their ignorance, they will think he's important. And he was saying these things publicly. That's all he would say. He couldn't even say Krishna's name. That's how offensive he was. Can you imagine? He was unable to say Krishna's name because he was so offensive. But when Lord Chaitanya came into the assembly, he sat where all of Prakashananda's followers washed their feet. He sat in that place where people... And the Lord emitted this beautiful effulgence. And Prakashananda said, seeing his humility, he said, "Are you in a troubled state of mind? Why are you sitting there?" And Lord Chaitanya said, "You are all great scholars and ascetics and senior sannyasis, very elder." Lord Chaitanya was very young then. He was only in his mid-20s. He said, "I'm not fit to sit with you." And because of that humility and the beauty and the qualities, Prakashananda just felt sympathy. He actually felt sympathy for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he came down with affection. It wasn't just a ritual. With actual affection, he took him by the hand and said, "Please come and sit with us." That was a Gyata Sukriti. He didn't know he's serving the Lord. He thought he was doing a favor to some sentimental junior pretender. He was calling him a pretender. But he did it with affection. And because he rendered service, his heart actually became receptive. And then the Lord, he said, "Why don't you associate with us? Why you're such a pretender? Why you're with these people?" The Lord said, "Because my Guru told me that I'm a fool. You're all studying Vedanta. My Guru said you'll never understand it. Just chant Hare Krishna." So I took my Guru's order and I just started chanting Hare Krishna. And I started entering in these ecstatic states, and I didn't know what was happening. I was crying, my limbs were trembling, my hairs were standing on end. I went back to my Guru and said, "What's happening to me?" And my Guru said, "Very good, my child. You have attained perfection. Now take this name of Krishna and spread it throughout the world." So I'm just doing what my Guru told me to do. I'm a fool. I'm not qualified to be with all of you. And then somehow Lord Chaitanya tricked them into discussing Vedanta, and then philosophically, shastrically, logically, Lord Chaitanya completely defeated all of their conceptions of Vedanta. And they actually realized he's the greatest scholar in the entire world. He's superior to all of us. And he calls himself a fool. And we call ourselves scholars. This is the quality of a devotee. Lord Sanatana Goswami declared himself to be the greatest fool to Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya said, you are saying this, but you're fit to be my guru. But he wasn't just saying it, he was feeling it. So in this way, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu got him to serve. So this service attitude is so important. Without this genuine service attitude, philosophy, ritual, even chanting the holy names is not going to be productive for a very long time. Prabhupada tells we do our sadhana, but if we don't have a proper service attitude, we do selfish things in the world. It's like the elephant going in the river to bathe and then throwing dust. It's not a very productive way of utilizing our time. So for this reason, it's very important that we do associate with advanced devotees. But the interesting point of this is you can only actually access the mercy of advanced devotees if you do not think that you're advanced. Otherwise, it's like a competition thing, where it's ritualistic. I'm with advanced devotees, but I'm advanced too. But if we really want to access the mercy of advanced devotees, we just do not think that we're advanced. Then we're open, we're receptive. And this is how Maya works. She can trick us and trap us by making us spiritually advanced. Really. It's not that she makes us spiritually advanced, but if we become spiritually advanced, Maya's always thinking, how am I going to get this person? How am I going to divert his or her attention? Now the person's spiritually advanced. I know what to do. I'll make them think that they're spiritually advanced, then they're finished. Then they can't get out of my clutches. Beautiful, isn't it? She's so thorough. And that's why we read the prayers of Narottam Das Thakur, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Ballavacharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya. We read the prayers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His Shikshastakam. Trinadapi Sunichena. It's foundational. So if we're not advanced, and we're addicted to this thing and that thing and this thing and this thing, Maya's going to try to trap us by alluring us to that. But when we make advancement, she has to try to get us somehow. Yes, let me make him or her think that she's advanced. Then they won't take shelter of an advanced devotee. And even if they're with them, they're thinking, I already know. I know this. I've heard those slokas before. I've heard these stories before. I'm learned. But that's not how we can focus on Krishna. We actually can focus by developing a service attitude. Service attitude means eager to serve, by eager to please, eager to hear. And by that attitude, Krishna's pleased. And then Krishna actually reveals himself in Hari Katha, reveals himself in Harinam, reveals himself in Hari Seva, Hari Puja, reveals himself through Vaishnava satsang. Then we develop a taste, a real taste. And then we really, because we're seeking the essence. So it is very important that devotees are challenged with opportunities to serve. This was very much Srila Prabhupada's method. He would challenge us with opportunities to serve. When there's a challenge to serve, it's not just a ritualistic thing. We actually have to we have to struggle a little or a lot. And that's really healthy, because we have to put our heart into it if we do it in the right way. And it could be very pleasurable. Actually, it's the higher taste. Param Dristvani Vartate. Devotional service is a higher taste. If we're doing our service in a proper attitude, it will be much more enjoyable than material sense enjoyment. So this is a very important part of bhakti. To be engaged in devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada, he would have his leaders just tax their brains to somehow or other figure out how to engage everyone in dynamic, fulfilling service to the Lord. If they just had a little flat in the middle of nowhere with nothing, Srila Prabhupada would tell every devotee, here's boxes of Back to Godhead, just go out and distribute them all day. Or at the beginning, there was nothing for devotees to do so much. There's no deities. There's just a little, how much you can clean a little house when you have 30 people living in it. So in the beginning of the movement, Prabhupada would just send them, there wasn't even any magazines at the beginning. He would just send them out in Harinam Sankirtan. And all the devotees would go out in Harinam Sankirtan for like 9 hours a day, 7 days a week. Can you imagine that? Some of my godbrothers playing mridanga for 9 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. One of my godbrothers would put on gloves and tape coins to his fingers so that they wouldn't bleed, and then he could just play the mridanga all day long. That was all. And they got magazines. They were doing that. And little by little, they got bigger buildings, and they got magazines and the Harinam, and then they had deities to worship. And gradually, Srila Prabhupada had opening restaurants and opening farm communities and Bhaktivedanta Institute for Scientists. There's so many ways to engage people. Send people to India and develop life membership programs. The challenge to keep people engaged so that their minds, philosophically, we have to understand the attitude in which we should be engaged. And with the association of devotees, it's all possible.